Mike Vizard, and welcome to the Techstrong gang. Alan Schimmel is on vacation for one more day, but he'll be back next episode. In the meantime, we're going to be talking about this, mind-blowing Windows outage that occurred last week, and then following that up, we're going to have a chat about there's a little bit of a disconnect between DevOps teams and their managers, and then finally, we're going to take a look at some interesting new research that's come down the pike as it relates to vulnerabilities in AI environments. You're watching Techstrong Gang, and we'll be back in a minute. All right, let's introduce our gang today because we got quite the lineup here. We're going to start with Camberley Bates from Futurum. Camberley, how you doing?
Pretty good this morning. Just got back myself from a little bit of holiday.
All right. Boy, people are taking vacations. This is a good sign, I think. All right. We also have joining us once again from the Bay Area, John Schwartz. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks, Mike. Good to see you all.
Right. And then a fellow we haven't seen in a couple of weeks, John Willis, who's one of the early godfathers, I guess, or concierge for the development of DevOps workflows. John, how you doing?
Welcome. Yeah, I would say I'm the consigliere where Patrick DeVar is the godfather. So.
There you go. There you go. And then, of course, we have Mitch Ashley out of Denver, as always. Mitch, good to see you.
Good morning. Good to be with everybody.
And then finally, we have Tracy Bannon, who's one of the thought leaders in the realm of DevSecOps especially, and well, we're going to have a lot to talk about that subject today. So, Tracy, good to see you.
Good morning. It's good to see everybody.
All right. Camberley, let's start with you for a little bit. Most folks spent the last weekend helping to clean up a lot of this outage, and the complexity of all that is still unfolding. But what's your sense of what was the financial impact, the downtime? I mean, as events go, how big was this?
Well, the list of kinds of companies that were impacted is pretty widespread. The clearest one, I think, probably people, especially since we're just talking about getting back from holiday, is the airlines. So across the board, we saw United, Delta, American, Allegiant, Frontier, Spirit, and I'm sure there's some others that I missed that were impacted, and they were either canceling flights, delaying flights. All that has a huge impact to them, and the amount of work that has to go into getting things restored. We've also seen 911s impacted, and that goes beyond the financial. That's people. That's hurting people. Where we've had, I think it was Alaska that said they had a 911 down. There's a couple others that have had 911 down. That's a big deal. Hospitals have been hit. Brigham up in Massachusetts got hit. There's a couple of other ones that shouldn't say hit, they were down. What it appeared to be is patient records weren't available, and what that impacts is the ability to serve the patients, as well as they were saying they were going to delay operations. Don't know if that was critical operations or how they were doing. I mean, critical operations are going to go forward, but maybe elective operations wouldn't go forward. So you have that. We also saw that the news was hit, or not the news, but the channels, communication channels. So we saw Australia got hit, but I also, on Friday, I was listening to today's show, and they were hit. They came into the blue screen of death. So you've got overtime, et cetera, going on. So we saw CrowdStrike, took a hit on their stock, and we'll see where that ends up coming back. But then you have the trust factor that you have to reestablish. So do I trust CrowdStrike? Do I continue with it as ubiquitous as they are, with people using it into their computers and their PCs, servers, et cetera?
Kimberly, I was going to add two more areas that I observed. One is actually with consumer. My daughter-in-law is a manager of a Macy's store, and their systems were offline. No registers. They were not able to contact their people. All of their corporate communications were down, as well as some of the state-level agencies that are dependent upon, that are Windows dependent, and had outages with their customer service areas. So a lot of impacts that are trickling across or have been trickling across quite a few different areas.
Yeah,
Mitch, what went wrong? Let's get into the details here of exactly what went wrong, Mitch, and to as much as we know about it at this moment here, because I don't think everybody understands what CrowdStrike was doing and how that kind of connected back to Microsoft. So give us a little bit of the technical details there.
Yeah, it isn't too technically deep, at least what we know so far. It was primarily an update that was issued to some anti-malware security software. And CrowdStrike claimed that it was content, not code, which implies things like signatures or whatever drives the software. Regardless, it's the same issue. The impact is just as big, whether it was that or something else. Frankly, the issue is when you cause this blue screen of death to a Windows server. There's few other options to recover from it. It's tough to apply a patch to a piece of software that won't boot. An operating system that won't boot. Now, Microsoft has initially provided the procedures is to reboot multiple times, as many as 15 times, and it may recover. I'm not quite sure why that would help you get there, but apparently it worked in some cases. The issue is, this is what Camberley and Trace were describing as a societal level impact, right? You may not be running a Windows server on your phone that you're doing a Square transaction with for your cab service, but it impacts you. And, a lot of our technologies, yes, they're virtualized and in the cloud. So if it's a matter of applying a patch or an update and then rebooting, that can be done by operations staff that know how to do that, whether it's in your own data center as well. But we also have a lot of computers who are sitting out on top of an oil well, sitting there with a blue screen, maybe don't have a power cycle capable AC plug that it's plugged into to power it. Because that's one of the ways you can reboot computers is not just go up and reboot it, but actually turn the power off to it, turn it back on remotely. So this is one of the ripples of it or the layers of it to recover, are certainly not small, especially given the widespread impact on so many different industries. And can you imagine if you didn't think to install a remotely manageable power strip up in the monitors that are showing what the latest arrivals are, wherever those computers are that you need to reboot. If you can't get to those very easily, you may be climbing up on ladders and going into closets you haven't visited in a long time.
And go, John, you've been doing this DevOps things forever. What's your assessment of how did we wind up with a single point of failure like this, and what should we learn from this?
Well, one comment I want to make on that: if you're running Windows servers on the edge, you're out of your mind.
It happens though, doesn't it, John?
But no, I think it's really, it's like we've seen this movie a couple of times now, right? It's the SolarWinds was adversaries, but it's the same problem. I'm in my travels in DevOps. I do get invited into a lot of software companies, and it is amazing to me, how they don't eat their own dog food. I've seen like prominent, well-known software that's running in almost every Fortune 500 company. We saw the SolarWinds for sure, right? But where they half of their supply chains are not even running CI; they're still doing manual, let alone CI/CD. And then, like what we've learned over the last 4 or 5 years is there's a lot more. There's Salsa, there's SBOMs, there's just the whole. So many different tools, automated governance, which I've spent a lot of time on, right? Wrote a couple of papers and books about it, right? So, I think there's the need for these vendors to be more transparent than just SBOMs. The whole industry thinks if you have an SBOM, then everything's great. It's baloney. SBOM is just like what you have. It doesn't tell how you do your operations. But the second part is, I think there's an authority bias here. In that, and this is why I think I call out the DevSecOps and DevOps vendors more than others, is that I think in the case of, this is counterfactual, but I think in the case of CrowdStrike, I suspect the vendors the customers didn't seem to test any of the software before they deployed it. Don't know that for a fact. But the point is, I think they think because it's CrowdStrike and they're a great vendor. In all research and everything. So, and stuff happens. So, but the point being, I think people probably accept their software easier than others, maybe because they think, well, their security, they're probably going to do all these things they eat their own dog food. So I think that those are the two things, my observation of like what the problems are here.
Tracy, is failing the test part of the issue here? Is that, I know you've always been an advocate for that particular thing, but it seems like maybe we just do take things for granted.
Well, it depends on whose responsibility it was to test. To John's point, is it a managed service that I'm using? And so I'm depending on the managed service to do the testing as opposed to my humans doing that testing. So we do have to figure out the roles and responsibilities. I know that sounds trite, but we actually do need to make sure that we understand that SLA. There's a lot to be said about something rolling out at this level, this broadly, and having this big an impact. I'd like to see what the forensics show. How did they test it before they rolled it out, right? Root cause analysis is massively important. It is not intended to be a witch hunt or scapegoating, but how are we going to learn and how are we going to make sure that we don't do this exact thing again? Because we are seeing it again and again and again and again, to John's point. We need to help people get over some of these bad behaviors.
Trace, one of the things that this brings to me is kind of like security incidents will happen, right? Mm-hmm. Software bugs will happen too. And I'm not saying an incident like this widespread is common. It's not. But it can and will happen again. Mm-hmm. What it makes me think of is, yes, we need to examine the software procedures, testing, all of those things to see how it slipped out. It's also the deployment. If you are a major software vendor, you're running in, cloud, hyperscalers environments, you're running in customer environments. Do you really need to do every update, cascade it, within a matter of hours or half a day? Or can you really kind of A/B test it and slow roll your initial updates to verify that things are still working well? I think if a little bit of patience and, it's easy for me to say Monday, Tuesday morning quarterback in whatever day of the week an event happens. Mm-hmm. But to me, it's also a process. I mean, unless it's a serious security flaw, I think you're much wiser to be cautious about how you roll things out, the mm-hmm. pace of it, verify that things are working well. Customers are reporting problems, continue that. So maybe slow down a little bit.
Well, Mitch, I'd like just to shim in I think there's a too big to fail problem too, mm-hmm. here, right? Like SolarWinds, mm-hmm. Who knew? I mean, I think anybody who knew SolarWinds knew, but who knew, right? And CrowdStrike, I think this under these radar is too big to fail. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier. It's about software supply chain hygiene and transparency. And I think if we could identify the too big to fails, and we could basically force them to be more transparent than just providing S-bombs, I think maybe we take it a little further to prevent these type of cascades. And they're going to get worse, with the technology exploding the way it is. So,
John Schwartz, let me bring John in here for a minute, guys. John, is this will we see more transparency? Because it is kind of a black eye, but no.
Jesus, I mean, given what's been going on in the news cycle and with the panel discussions we've had over the last couple of weeks about security breaches, we're talking about open AI among other things, and Google wants to buy Wiz, which shows what it thinks about cybersecurity. It's its biggest acquisition ever when it happens. What's really unfortunate, and John mentioned this, CrowdStrike is this well-respected company that was fairly not well known. Well, now it is for all the wrong reasons, right? This is a kind of a cautionary tale about technology when it goes wrong. And the one thing that I've always come across when reporting about cybersecurity, and I used to report a lot about it about 10 years ago, was people only care about outages and security and lost IDs when they are directly impacted. And I can't think of an incident that has rippled across North America and Europe, Asia, Australia, South Africa, what have you, over multiple industries. We're talking about hospitals, airlines, banks, media companies, payment platforms, online shopping websites. I mean, this was not only created a lot of collateral damage financially, but it could physically to people in hospitals. I mean, this could end up not only costing CrowdStrike, where do we see what is happening to its stock, but I'm thinking about class action suits, lost customers, damage to its reputation, which kind of brings me to this point and something I want to ask of the panel. What what can IT experts do, or what can IT service leaders learn from this experience, as well as how to protect from something like this happening in the future? I'm not sure if they can, and how do you handle a situation like this when it's unfolding?
It's a great question. When you're running an IT organization, you have so many suppliers that you're working with. Even if you're closely aligned with one like Microsoft, or maybe you're using them, a lot of their technology, or you're an open source or whatever it might be. It's still just like we have diversity of suppliers into buildings for broadband network access. You still have to have some level of diversity in your suppliers. And we make decisions of saying, I'm going to move all my mail to Office 365 or whatever service you choose to use. You're now entirely dependent upon that service. And if something happens, it goes down. And what are your alternate communications? Do you suddenly fall back on, sorry, Mike Fazard, Slack or other forms of communication to do that? Especially when it comes to, there's transacting business and then there's just basic communications. And when your servers are down, that can affect both very easily. And so you're almost in a disaster recovery kind of scenario, or at least in, let's say, a business resilience recovery mode of what do we do, what's happening. So you need to have clear communications with your suppliers and we want them to be transparent with us and not over communicate and tell us things that don't matter or point us in the wrong direction, but what we need to be doing in terms of how we recover.
And Mitch,
points out. Go ahead, please.
I was just going to say quickly that I think there needs to be transparency in like a postmortem that said, what was your software delivery? What was your supply chain architecture? Is SALSA, is supply chain levels for software architecture? Did you have any SALSA level? Like, I think these are things that nobody's asking for these too big to fail. Like, we're not demanding postmortems where, and we just keep, these software companies just run, sort of amok when it comes to hygiene of things that, other companies, like really big companies, do really, really well. Banks do it really well.
Well, I'm also wondering if there's a big issue here on the blast radius. It's taken, how did it become this big and this broad? When we are very dependent on a company that is, it sounds like, I'm not in the security side of the business side, the infrastructure piece of it that has to do with the data, the availability, reliability, protection area. But one of the things that we always talk about is, keep your blast radius at a point that you can recover. I mean, what you're going through right now, is, what are the critical apps that I got to bring back up? Prioritization of all that. And how do you bring those applications up if you have to bring up the application, or is it might just be bringing up the endpoint? And does it mean that I actually have somebody physically, and some of the stuff that's out there saying you have to have somebody physically there to bring that endpoint device back up. I can't imagine if I'd walk into, DIA, I live here in Denver, that, you would have to walk through all of Denver and bring up every one of those screens because they're linked to some sort of, PC server or whatever that controls them. I mean, it's a nightmare in terms of the recoverability.
Right. This goes back to continuity planning. Like, there are lots of hygiene things. John mentioned this earlier about from a DevOps perspective and too big to fail, but things like business continuity planning, which includes disaster and recovery, making sure that your organization has a commitment to understanding what your resiliency posture is, right? We tabletop these things. If this goes down, what will happen? We need to understand those, and having an SBOM is important, but it ultimately, if we have an ecosystem that we're in charge of, understanding where we have dependencies on other organizations and their SLAs, understanding our continuity plan, and having a very specific understanding of when this electric socket fails, what are the other things that are going to fail downstream from it is good hygiene, right? We're back to talking common sense again. Maybe common sense isn't so common right now.
All right, guys, I'm going to have to leave it here because we're full up on 20 minutes already, and we could go on this subject probably for the entire day, and I'm sure we'll revisit it again during the gang sessions that are coming up. But I would just point out that, hey, maybe as part of your resiliency plan, paper and pencil, check it out. It kind of works from time to time. We'll be back in a minute. All right, folks, we're back and we're talking about the relationship between DevOps teams and their managers. There's a story on DevOps.com about a pair of surveys that went out about this particular subject. And it was just surprising to see how much of a disconnect there was between what the developers said they were doing versus what the managers thought they were doing. And for instance, there was a significant gap between the number of folks who were managers who thought scanning was happening on a regular basis versus what developers were saying. Tracy, let's start with you. It's not generally a surprise, especially in bigger organizations, that there's a disconnect sometimes between managers and developers, but is it too wide right now? And is it because of the complexity, or what's going on in the rank and file?
I think a lot of it has to track back to where we are in the growth cycle. Organizations continuing to automate, sharing the data about their automation, sharing the data about what developers are doing. There's always this balance, and John will probably talk to this. There's a balance between understanding all of the data about an individual developer and exactly what he, she, they are doing versus the team versus the organization. So those managers don't always get a clear view because they're just asking word of mouth. They may be not even walking down an aisle. They may be looking at a Slack channel, but not looking at the data that's being shared. There's also a responsibility, though, for the developers, for anybody related to the SDLC to be raising their hand and letting people know what they're doing, because the ultimate value is when you get working software in production. So if everybody's not rallied around that, these kind of things will continue to happen. The impedance, right, is about human transparency right now and that honesty that has to happen. John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%, Percy. I think this subject could go on forever, ever, because the technology mapping is a mess, right? It even bleeds into the last discussion about hygiene. I mean, developers are frustrated because just the whole dependency map of technology is not well understood, right? Like, you write 10 lines of code and it generates over 100,000 lines of code under the covers, in all those libraries. We would talk about outages and, what happened about 5 or 6 years ago, a disgruntled open source developer removed a blank and a third of the internet went down, right? Literally. I mean, in the JavaScript object code, right? So, but I think that one of the most interesting things in our end is I think the work, I don't think Dora helps us. I don't think Space helps us. These are the sort of developer productivity metrics, but I've been pretty vocal about, like, Dora helped us get to a great place in DevOps, but I don't think it's useful, especially in these kind of discussions, about manager developer, gaps. I think the DevX stuff, though, is really, really fascinating. So if you look into this stuff, it's about monitoring feedback loops, cognitive load, flow state, interruptions. And so, like, again, it's sort of when a survey just says that 97% of developers are disgruntled, or they're wasting 70% of, say, 8 hours a week or lost time, without really trying to understand how do you get to find out why. And I think out of all the metrics I've seen, I think most metrics that people talk about and show on slides and present about developer productivity are navel gazing. they don't get to the bottom line. I do believe what the DevX folk have done in Nicole and a group of people is, I think this is the right path. Finally, there's some metrics to me that, I don't want to hear how many story points you had, right? Like, but this stuff and the DevX stuff really seems like, that's where I'd put a focus on if I was concerned about these surveys and these gaps.
Well, isn't it really? It's getting back to becoming human-centric. That's what this is all about, is that we have, right? We know about Taylorism and trying to replace people as though they're cogs and having no sense of what they're going through. Developers.
You're not Deming, are you?
No, I'm not. But I've learned from those who are the students of Deming. But focusing on the humans becomes such an important part of this. We've learned it over the course of our careers. DevX and DevRel, right? This new role that's emerging, that is somebody who is championing on behalf of the developer, is a very, very important part of this mix. We've got to take care of the humans, and we have to be consistently focused on that. I mean, we think about DevOps and agility have been about making life better for humans. But the metrics don't always help us understand the humans in this. One final thing is that I think we need to stop talking about individual developer productivity. Yes. I think we need to stop talking about individual developer productivity, because a single developer doesn't deliver team metrics. That's okay. But let's understand the promoter score for that developer. Let's understand their satisfaction. Let's understand their contribution. It might not be a story point, that might not be burning down any kind of debt, that might be actually educating the guy beside them. So there, rant over.
Mitch, jump in here for a second. Mitch, do we not want to admit that maybe we have a problem? And we're always kind of like, on the IT side, we're trying to present the fact that we are the people who bring order to the chaos, and yet our own systems and our own processes are often chaotic. So maybe, is this kind of a moment where we just need to all stand up and look at each other and say, it's okay not to be perfect?
Hi, I'm Mitch Ashley, and I make developers unproductive. That's the meeting we need to have. Now, I'll tell you a little story. One of those, to give you some humility moments. When I first became a manager at our holiday party with our family that year, one of my cousins asked my daughter, who I think was about 4 years old, "What does your dad do?" She said, "Well, he talks on the phone and he goes to meetings." And that was her definition, out of the mouth of babes, right? And I think a lot of times what managers do is forget that if you're going to have somebody paint your house, I'm not saying a developer's a house painter, but you're going to have somebody do a job, paint your house, whatever it might be. You're not going to sit there and talk to them for 6 hours and then expect them to get a full day's of work done in. Mm-hmm. But we do that to our development teams because we think we need their expertise. We think they need to be in every meeting that they may possibly need to be into. And they hate that. They hate wasting their time, because all the time they're sitting there thinking about what they've really got to do. They've got to go back and do their real job. So I think a source of this, and I agree with what Mike said, what Tracy said and John said. But in addition, I think leaders, look at yourself for a moment. If these folks are really hard to find, they're a valuable resource. We need them obviously to do great things with software. Treat their time as extremely valuable and use it wisely. If you can do a 15-minute meeting instead of an hour meeting, or you can do with half the number of meetings, cut it back. Just cut it back. Let these people go do their work and make sure that people are communicating either in other methods, or when you do get together, you're using their time really wisely. That's my advice. I went that after Thanksgiving, I went back to work. I'm like, okay, what meetings do we need to cancel? My daughter says that's all I do. So guess what? I had lots of volunteered ideas.
All kinds of things. Asynchronous communication is a big part of this. How do I get out of a meeting, and how do we move some of these things? Like, you should be able to, if you're doing your work in a way that's transparent, sometimes the manager doesn't need to come by, doesn't need to get an update. They can go pull the information that they want. So there's some enablement and some transparency that we need in all this. And let's let people have conversations in Slack, in whatever other async channel that they have, because that enables them to get their work done, right?
Meetings are always, they're just counterproductive for the most part, not just for developers, but for anybody in general. Hey, Mike, you wrote this fine story. Can I ask you what the impact of AI has on all of this? Does it complicate or alleviate matters?
I think that's still unknown. Theoretically, it should reduce some of the toil, but my sense of things, and John, you've been an early proponent, but I don't feel like, AI is going to magically transform everything about software development overnight. I think it's going to take care of some, small scratches.
I think it's two sides to that. One is it's creating a tension point, right? There's a tension point in that there's a belief at levels, at a lot of executive levels, C levels, that they don't need developers, or they don't need as many developers. And that's trickling down to sort of, I think in one of those surveys, they even talked about sort of the angst of AI, right? So there's all sorts of angst. And then there's the part of the old school developers who are just going to resist these tools. But the truth is, in the end, the way we do everything we do is changing underfoot right now. I'm not saying that, if you looked at day traders 10 years ago, like Goldman Sachs would have had, probably thousands of day traders. I think now they have less than 100, right? And that's because of algors, right? And it's the same thing, right? We're going to see this change and reduction in the way things work, because I can tell you, I close tickets with automated dev tools now. I can, the tooling is, and it just gets better at GPT 4.0 is significantly better than GPT-4. This new Claude 3.5 that's going to come out, right? And GPT-5 is coming out. You can't ignore that these tools are changing the way we develop or create things. And but I think, again, there's two parts of it. I think there's the people who are resisting it. There's sort of the tension from above of we're gonna get rid of all developers, and we're not there yet. No. But that's a meme that's happening at the C level in a lot of large corporations.
I want to get Camberley's opinion on that particular topic, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Businesses are more dependent upon software than ever, but I don't really feel like business executives have any understanding of this conversation we just had and what the implications of it are. And so there's a gap between the managers and the development teams, but the gap between the business and the rest of the software development team seems to be even wider.
I think what you're talking about is that we've changed where the factories are. We've started talking about this AI factory, but we've had this code factory for a very long time. And for the longest time, it's been part of IT. It's not been ubiquitous to the company. And what I was, as I was listening to you guys, because it's a different world that I've spent in, I was kind of thinking about my dad, who was a captain of a ship. And one of the principles that he put in me was walk the ship floor. And he would always go down to the engine room and walk the engine floor. And part of that was beloved by the people of the ship. And I know that many of the people that have served under him in the military as well as in the commercial world. But because of that, he was able to get more out of them. And you have in manufacturing people that walk shop floors. You have in mining people that walk the mining. And I'm wondering, because we're so digital and because we're so, as you were saying, async, not synchronous communications, but async communications, and we sit behind these screens and we sit alone, and many, many times that ability to work together as a team is lessened than what it was maybe if you're working on a construction field, if you're working in a mining operation. And maybe those disciplines need to come back, not only just for the team, but also for the management layers that come in and say, walk the code floor. You live with those people.
So I've had remote teams, globally dispersed teams since 2007. And I'd argue with that we've had phenomenal results.
I agree.
But it was because we took protocol that we could emulate what happens if you're co-located in a building. So we have our virtual coffees where we get together. We have some rules of the road for where we pop up and just have conversations, and those are allowable. We're not looking at your mouse clicks to make sure that you're doing something. We encourage there to be that interaction, that synchronous interaction. So I don't know that it necessarily is a force back to office physical co-location as much as it is an intentionality to connect humans to humans. Focus on the humans, right? Focus on the humans. I'll just keep saying that.
Absolutely. And I think there's skills that we have developed, been forced upon us or developed as non-coders in the world when we went through COVID, that we didn't know how to operate in that way. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden, you guys can teach us, but that doesn't mean, as you were talking about, the management layer knows what is going on. So it's embracing the management layer, needing to embrace these new capabilities and understand how that works through how an organization, flows.
Well, too, John would probably add in on this that transparency of the information, the manager being able to get the data because in software engineering, what we're doing is there's information, there's metadata about your daily activities. It's flowing through the system. There flow information that's available. Let's teach folks how to get after that and how to interpret it and how to understand it. So let's make it that when we're talking, we're focused on something that matters, not on nitty gritty because you didn't know how to go and pull or didn't have that information available to you, which will probably, John, I'll take it back to. We still have a lot of organizations that have poor hygiene.
And I think we've done it. I think we've done a great job, to the point like DevOps, for example, it really is borrowed from Lean, from Agile, and all that's borrowed from Toyota Production Systems. So, there is sort of a virtual and parallel nature of how we deliver software. But I think if you look at the history of the DevOps movement, it has been about trying to emulate or posture industrial economies into knowledge economies. And I think, there's a lot that still haven't read the books and haven't gotten the memo, but I think that that's not a bigger problem. The idea of sort of walking the floor, Toyota would have called that go to Gemba. I don't disagree that we are different in software delivery than creating cars or managing or running ships, but I think we have done a fairly good job in really trying to emulate some of those industrial knowledge.
All right, guys, I got to cut this off here, but I would remind everybody in those books that John's talking about, there's a whole section called empathy. It's kind of how the whole DevOps thing works, and it's all about trust. So, practice what we preach. We'll be back in a minute.
I'm Bonnie Schneider, sustainability contributor to the Techstrong Group. I'm excited to introduce you to a groundbreaking new initiative from Techstrong Research, the Sustainability Pulse Meter. The Pulse Meter offers valuable insights into how environmental responsibility factors into tech purchasing decisions for key players in the industry. Position your company as a leader in the industry and differentiate from your competitors with the Sustainability Pulse Meter, offered exclusively from Techstrong Research.
All right, and we're back, and we're going to be talking about some research into vulnerabilities as it relates to AI platforms, and specifically there's been some analysis of what's going on an SAP platform specifically, but I'm going to let John walk us through this because he's the one looking at this, and I do mean John Willis here. But John, you seem pretty excited about this. There seems to be some progress being made here. What's your take?
Yeah, no, I think I've mentioned this before. We're working on a paper through Gene Kim's organization called Dear CIO, which is sort of modeled after the Dear Auditor letter we wrote years ago. And we want to sort of make the CIO aware of all these potential unseen dangers in generative AI. because there's a lot of stuff here that is not obvious. It's a lot of these C-level people think, oh, I can get rid of all these people. I don't need that anymore. Same thing we found in shadow IT. And so NIST, I think, is not doing a great job. No disrespect to anybody who's a big fan of NIST. They're really, they're treating AI as if it was Google, Google search. Like if you read their sort of, now OWASP, I think, is doing a much better job, but they're very general. And to everybody's defense, we're so early here. But these Wiz guys, Wiz.io, they're kind of a full service cloud security vendor, right? And I've been tracking them for now a couple of months now, and they just posted recently, I think it was last week, about a vulnerability in SAP's AI service, but they posted a couple. They're all the same way, the same attack surface, which is these AI as a service vendors, Hugging Face, Replicate, now sort of SAP's SAP AI Core. What they find is, and this goes to the dear say, there's so much unvetted code in this AI, the Python libraries. We're used to vetting, Java libraries for years, right? And some of this code has really never been run at scale in large enterprises or in the government. And I'd love to hear, as soon as I finish, I'd like to hear Tracy's opinion on this as well. But what they're finding is, like, all this stuff in like the models, there are a lot of times so a lot of these models, which people don't understand, have executable code in them. They'll have, for example, in Python, there's what they call pickle libraries. They allow you to serialize objects. Well, what they do is they have to write to the file system. So so what they're able to do is do these lateral attacks, run malicious models or update models. And in those malicious models, they literally create lateral movement. And what they found, like in the Hugging Face one, they were able to escape out of running the model, like a training model, or running sort of some inference against it. And then they were able to escape into a Kubernetes cluster. And a lot of these AI service people don't have goes back to hygiene. They don't have the security and DevSecOps and DevOps hygiene. So they don't have their Kubernetes clusters patched properly. So then they find vulnerabilities. And the Hugging Face one is the scariest one, because what happened was they were able to show, by running a malicious model, that not only could they escape out of the model, escape out of a Kubernetes cluster, they literally got on, and because Hugging Face is running on Amazon, they actually got on a multi-tenant host. And they did a similar thing with Replicate. But the SAP one is SAP's infrastructure. But what they were able to do there, same model, of like escaping out of the running the model, and then finding vulnerabilities in a Kubernetes cluster. In this case, they actually created their own pod, and then Bob's your uncle at that point, because they were able to sort of implement an Argo work file. They were able to attack Grafana. They were able to get AWS. Actually, they were using some AWS services. They found credentials. They were, they literally, the list, if you read the article, the list of compromises that they just, and here in this case, Hugging Face is one thing, except for them having a multi-tenant access on a physical Amazon host or a virtual VM. But this is like SAP's customers. So they were getting customers prompts, they were getting customers credentials, they were getting all sorts of really scary stuff, right? Being able to read Docker file images, actually read. Well, this is the scariest one. Is it's called false prediction. Even OWASP doesn't have this as a top 10 LLM, that where people can go in and put false predictions in models. This is like squatting, domain squatting, right? Like, if I know that I can put false predictions into a model, I can maybe downstream have people do actions based on the response. It's the breadth of the complexity here is just mind-boggling, and I don't know, I've got to give these Wiz people incredible credit, because I think they're pointing out stuff that should be scaring the heck out of everybody.
Tracy, cause for pause?
Oh gosh, there's all kinds of things to be concerned about here. I will say that while NIST has not yet stepped up, my hope is that they will, but CISA is filling in some good gaps there. So I'm happy to see what's happening there. And at the end of the day, models are code. And if a software engineer has not created the model because they're not data scientists, we'll come back to that in a second, if the person that's creating that model doesn't have the necessary understanding of the good hygiene, we're going to continue to see this. We're going to continue to see that. So there does have to be some intersection. We do have to help to educate the data scientists, the data engineers. We have to think about working together much more closely. And what John is talking about, the types of cyber impacts, it goes beyond the models themselves. The concept of data poisoning has been around for a while. We're not really bringing it up and talking about it a whole lot, but what John brought up about being able to take somebody and provide them with a false output, that's model poisoning. And if I want to poison a model, I don't necessarily have to make it something massive that you see right away. It can be very tiny, and I can build on that drip, drip, drip over a long time. So think about the impacts of that. I can impact the medical field that way. Think about it with software engineering. All I need to, if we're training all of these models to help us to write software, and I'm doing it by looking at different open source repositories that are now have been lightly poisoned, small little bits, little drop of cyanide here, just a little bit, not enough to take you out, but enough to be uncomfortable. We're going to continue to see that. I have a lot of hope for what the future holds, but we are right now in the embryonic state where people are, it's the Wild West, and people are trying to figure this stuff out. Gosh, I could talk about this for hours. I don't want people to suddenly hang their head and go, oh, this is terrible. This is horrible. We've got a lot of really incredible experts that are focused on model assurance, on AI assurance. How do you make sure that the outcomes are valid? How do you know and trust the corpus that's going in? There are a lot of really incredible people that are focused on that part of it, not on what the model does itself, not on who's created, but all of that AI assurance. I'm betting on those people. I'm absolutely betting on those people.
Hey, Camberley, let me ask you real quick. How's the feeling in the pit of your stomach right now as you listen to all this?
What's buzzing through my head is that for very long, HPC market never wanted anything to do with data protection. And they never did anything. And then when we got into the AI the last 2 years, there still was nothing going on in there. Now that we're the Gen AI, all of a sudden, it's kind of a topic, but as typical, data protection or anything that has to do with data and that kind of stuff, it tends to be the tail of the dog, and it's the last thing anybody thinks about. So I think that what you're talking about here, data poisoning or AI assurance, which is, I love that term. That's an awesome term. Not just governance, but assurance that you know what you're getting is real, and I would love to see NIST address it. If CISA is addressing it, fabulous, because that's maybe how we're going to get there, is part of this. It's got to be secure. So before we even get to the other side of the data, it's got to be secure. And that's the security guys. And that gets unwieldy because now we're working with a lot of open source technology. And you're right, SBOM doesn't work. Just SBOM doesn't work. I don't know what I don't know. And so much of when I read those articles, so much of what was going on with Wiz was not just an open source problem, but it was like somebody left a door open, didn't configure it right.
One of the things I'm thinking about, as you remind me of, Camberley, is it's code and it's also data, right? That's one of the unique things about AI in whatever form of models, whether it's generative or machine learning. I'm thinking about back at the Reinforce event, AWS, close to the beginning of the year, the CISO got up and talked about the trillion chip and the enclaves that it lives in and the separation of data that's used by AI applications and software versus other parts of the system. And what it reminds me of is, in some way, I'm not saying that AI is a contagion that we have to control or anything like that, but John pointed out so many examples that the folks at Wiz are finding of sort of what are some of the blast radius term that you used earlier, what the blast radius can be when something goes awry. And I'm not talking about AI-mageddon taking over mankind. I'm just talking about we have a new kind of technology that we're using in a different kind of way. What new types of data protection in terms of architecture of the application and how it operates, the systems that it operates in? And do we need better protections to, think of Tracy, back to our security, microsegmentation and things like that we can use to limit the blast radius of new technologies.
One of the points is clear, and it's the reason why we're writing the Dear CIO letter, because what we're seeing is CEOs are hiring chief AI officers. Chief AI officers are going off on their own and building infrastructure. Early on with OpenAI, one of the bigger breach internal, they created it themselves. They were using a bunch of Python and parallel sync libraries with Redis, and they just didn't know there were vulnerabilities in its code. Like this is what's happening in Hugging Face. Hugging Face is running Kubernetes, but they don't have the expertise. They don't even know what they don't know. So what you're seeing is all these AI experts. There are absolute experts, like a chief AI officer for a large bank, probably coming from Stanford, but they don't know. They've never been through an audit. They don't know what it takes. And this is the letter to the Dear CIO is, CIO, don't let them proxy what's going to come back to you anyway, because hey folks, it's compute, network, and storage. And it's a bunch of middleware technologies, all these. When you run these infrastructures, you run the lang chains, all under the covers, we're running stuff that we've been running for infrastructure all along. Kafka, Kubernetes, things like Redis, MongoDB, right? Like all these tools are basically part, Elastic, and like the banks know how to do a really good job because people like Tracy learn from Tracy what to lock down, how to do it. Unfortunately, these chief AI officers or these Hugging Face infrastructure people, they don't know what they don't know. And that's the scary part. That's the scariest part of the Wiz story.
John Schwartz, anybody out in the Valley talking about this among the tech bros, or are they just kind of quietly ignoring all this?
Well, John brought something up that I found interesting. There has been a debate out here about the CAIO and the necessity of having one. The feedback I always hear is that, in a sense, it's conflicting with the CTO, the CDO, the CSO. They're kind of overlapping with one another and working against one another and creating situations that probably shouldn't exist. And I was just going to throw this out maybe to John or to others about, is a company, what type of company would need a CAIO? There are just a few, or would everyone?
Well, not just companies.
Yeah, this is this crazy idea.
Not just companies. I'll hop in there before John says and say, think about the government and think about every one of these agencies has a CIO.
Right, that's correct.
Right. And it had a CDO. What I'm seeing is not, instead of a CAIO, that they're actually bringing that underneath. And so it's the CDAO, so data and analytics. Yeah. So they're bringing that together. But I agree with everything you've said, that we've got this dramatic overlap, all these roles. This is important. We need a C-suite to deal with it. This is important. We need another C-suite to deal with it.
Well, the problem to me also is that the CEO, and it's just from all indications, everything I've heard from you all or read or studies, that the CEO really doesn't care. They're trying to just push these initiatives, whatever the consequences may be. I'm being very cynical about it, but I kind of get that impression. And it creates this ripple of chaos.
Yeah, they're in this. I've heard this quote from CIOs and from their CEO, which is, it's do or die. AI is do or die. And they don't know what this technology is. So what's the sort of obvious thing is, go find somebody who is an expert in this technology and help run your banking or financial analyst business unit, which is a great idea. Mark Schwartz wrote a book, A Seat at the Table, right? And he ran Homeland Security, border protection or whatever, the part of Homeland Security. And he wrote a book. In that book, he talked about, he even said, when you basically create a parallel CDO to a CIO, you are basically, and I'm paraphrasing, admitting that you've failed at infrastructure and operations and applications. And so my only message is don't I mean, if you want to hire a chief AI officer, to Tracy's point, I sort of disagree. I think more companies are putting a CAO or a CDAIO on a parallel level with a CIO. And I think that's a huge mistake. And I think that our letter to CIOs, we're part of Gene Kim's organization, which is Starbucks and Disney and a lot of big organizations. We're going to see if we can get a letter to sign it and say that is a mistake. CIO, you're going to have to own the responsibility of this AI.
Yeah, the CIOs that I've talked to, I did a story about this at Dow Jones, and the consistent answer I got from several CIOs is this is just a mistake. This is just going to create problems.
Yeah, no, it is. But they're in a rock and a hard place, right? Their CEO is basically saying, I can't wait on. This is cloud all over again. That's why I wrote an article called Shadow AI, right? Mm-hmm. It's cloud all over again. I can't wait on you guys. I have to do this now. Even, the imperatives here are so much more. And so, the CIOs are like, okay, yep. and some,
it's just basically like move as fast as you can. If it breaks, we'll worry about that later. But consequences can be, they're going to be bad.
Well, and guess what? Who does it come back to? This is what your point, John. It's going to come back to the CIO shoulders. Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah, well, it's going to tarnish the brand, and who's going to get in trouble when the brand gets a reputation problem? And when you lose $5 billion market cap in a day, like Equifax did, like who are they going to call first? They're not going to call the chief AI officer. They're going to call the CIO.
I'd suggest that we keep the CIO in their role, and that they have their, the Knights of the Round Table. It should be instead of their chief officers, it should be their chief engineers. So if you have a chief AI engineer, let's get them the experts that they need.
I agree.
But there needs to be somebody. It's just like anything else. Somebody has to own the responsibility, has to own the final decision making, even if it's informed, and it should be informed by the experts. But putting another, how many drivers do you want for this car? Yeah, only one. Only one.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Go ahead, Camberley, the last word.
Just last, we've seen a bit of this before with the Kubernetes crowd, the KubeCon crowd. It used to be all the dev people there. In the last 2 years or last year and a half, actually, we saw the rise of the platform engineer power because DevOps guys didn't want to bother with that storage crap and that network crap and that server crap. So I think that trending, but not until we have a couple of visible failure kind of things that happen, and then people start addressing those requirements for hardening the environment.
All right, folks, we got to close it off here. Hey, this was a great episode. I enjoyed every one of these conversations. I would just point out there's a fine line between do or die and do and die, right? So think twice.
That's a way to end a show. Oh.
On that positive note.
Yeah, uplifting as always. Yeah,
there we go. I'll just go do.
We have more uplifting coverage coming up on Techstrong TV. We invite you to stay tuned and check it all out. But as always, it's a joy to be with you guys, and thank you all for being on the show. And we'll see you next time.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.